Students went to Chicago to meet with Chicago Roar, a regional off-branch of the national nonprofit named Crossroads, which teaches institutions about anti-racism training.
The impact I've seen as a result of my work in Crossroads, in me, it's been helpful to develop a vocabulary around experiences of race and racism and to try to create a common language that my communities and my family and my friends can kind of use as we're thinking about how to live in a city that's as deeply segregated as Chicago. This week in particular, I think, has been very moving because we get to see the city through the eyes of all of you who are here. Maybe we've been to a place dozens of times, but now being here with you all for the first time, I think it's most of y'all's first time to our city. It's powerful. We're seeing things differently. We're thinking about them in a new way.
But also my experiences with race and racism, both not only in college, but in the military, plus 20 years of my work in law. I had different experiences being a Chicagoan. And when I heard about the trip, I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to share my work and understanding about systemic anti-racism, and also to welcome folks to Chicago, which is a city I love. And I felt like blending the two of those was a great opportunity for me to contribute to the education of young folk, particularly around blending anti-racism and anti-oppression sensibilities into your regular education. So I think that's what drew me to the work.
As a white person growing up in North Dakota, I didn't think about race very often. I was definitely in that sort of what we, I guess is kind of ableist language of colorblind. We're starting to say more race evasive, but that was definitely my thinking. When I got to college, I started to think more about white privilege and racism, and even just some of the systemic aspects of it. And we really do believe that it's going to take all of us and all of our institutions for us to eliminate white supremacy. And so it just gives us an opportunity to be in partnership with, just build more and more of a critical mass of organizations in Chicago and beyond that are doing this work.
This is called the Dan Ryan, and it basically cut through, and they use eminent domain to take over people's houses and communities in order to build the interstate right through the black communities around here.
Today we looked at Xenophobia borderlands theory and tried to analyze how the center constitutes a normal and good life, and the borderlands as a result stand opposed to that as something that's deviant or non-conforming. And we're currently using that theory to apply to Chicago.
We just switched metros. We were originally on the red line coming from Southside Hyde Park, and we just switched to the brown line, which is going more north. And it's just interesting seeing that as we went more north, the demographic switched up. And also in this new metro that we're in, the setting is very different. The seats are really nice. We have, lined. It feels like there's a heater in here. There's a lot of advertisements of big chains. It smells really good in here, and this is not what we experienced in the red line.
And we're on our way to the American Indian Museum, and the most shocking thing that I've realized on this trip is the intentional forms of racism. And there's an example of this in the placement of different hospitals, and how within a community prevalent with gun violence, there's no trauma centers. So that's a form of systematic oppression and a form of slow violence.
So acknowledging the continuous existence and resilience of Native people is super important to the cultural identity and the self-esteem, as well as reducing harm and stress on Native populations. It's also super important to have these conversations within your own circles. So if someone comes up wearing a Kansas City Chiefs hat or a Blackhawks jersey, to kind of reflect on the way that perpetuates violence against Native people, and kind of push back on how you're contributing to settler colonial violence, especially within brown and black communities. I think it's easy to forget that we all, even indigenous people, function inside of settler colonial societies and all perpetuate that violence on indigenous peoples and lands. So how do we reduce that harm? Should be a question that you're having on an individual level, but also on a family and community level. these conversations if they're comfortable, you're not having them correctly.
I believe that paper genocide, of what she was saying, is that when you're multiple forms of indigenous or you have less than 100%, then it's erased from paper. So you're not basically indigenous just because you've been like historically erased from what you were born with, and so like they're taking that away from you. Just because you're not biologically 100%, for example, Cherokee or another form of indigenous group.
Being first gen, it just really touched my heart to like hear the story of an indigenous woman and some of the traumas that they suffer on these reservations. And just thinking about it, being Latino, Asian, African American, you always have a home base that you can go to. You always have a country that is yours or a country that you can look to, you know, to refresh yourself. But for these indigenous people, they don't necessarily have a land in which they can call their own because it's been colonized. It's been stolen from them. And now they've all been pushed to these reservations that are still being managed by the people that are oppressing them. So I could really just hear the pain in her voice when she was telling us about her story and about the rapes and some of the things that were occurring on the reservations. And it was really enlightening and it really touched me.
And this is our exhibit on the Japanese American World War II incarceration process. And a couple of things I think that are important. Not only is this important in terms of telling the story of the 120,000 Japanese Americans that were incarcerated during World War II, but it's really a testament to the issues of civil and human rights and how it is that we need to continue to stand firm in trying to protect civil and human rights for everyone. Our community, especially right now, is very concerned with the policies that are being enacted in relation to border policy and immigration and refugee issues. We see extreme parallels between the experience of Japanese Americans during World War II and what's happening at the borders with child separation and indefinite family detention. These children and families are being separated from each other, some of them for what seems to possibly be permanently. Children are being held in prisons, they're being medicated without their parents' consent, they're being abused sexually and mentally, psychologically, and I think that right now, for our community, it's always been kind of a story about how important it is to never again ever allow this to happen to anybody else. But really what we've been trying to say is that never again is now, that these policies that affected us in many ways are happening right before our eyes in real time today. And so I think that our message is a call to everybody to stand up and to help protect civil and human rights for everyone.
We just had a session about the Japanese American experience in the concentration camps. And I'm Japanese American, and it was a very, very touching experience and very personal because of my family's history being interned in the camps. My mother was in Manzanar, my father was in Gila River, Arizona. Yesterday we went to see, or we got to hear about the American Indian experience, and there are so many things that are parallel to the experience of being a minority in this country and how difficult it is to try to live our lives to the best of our ability in this country. And this whole experience has just been a real eye-opener, I must say. It just, today's experience it made me want to cry because it brought back so many memories about my folks and how they didn't talk about it. And here we're talking about it in front of this classroom, and it just feels so personal, and I'm finally sharing it with everybody.
So we wanted to integrate the concepts that we've learned yesterday and today. One of the concepts were historical trauma, so a lot of Indigenous people who are Indigenous don't like sharing enough information to the public because they have a fear of the non-Indigenous people taking it away, their knowledge, and distributing it without recognizing who they are. And so that concept was brought again today by Professor Dr. Ryan, and he was describing that there's 3 historical trauma within the Japanese American population. And the common theme about this historical trauma is that once this has happened, they're in fear that this trauma is going to happen again with a different population.
Something that really focuses or grounds our work is this aspect of empowerment of tenants. We know that as a volunteer organization, we have very limited capacity, and that if we don't spend the resources and skills to really empower tenants to be their self-advocates, that we're never going to be able to accomplish our bigger scale goal, which is to create a tenant movement to stop the gentrification first here in Albany Park, but that only will expand to the whole city of Chicago, and that hopefully is a model that other cities are following, increasing a movement at a national level of renters that not only ATU is doing, but that other groups like Right to the City, Homes for All, are creating in their own cities, and that we're already in communication around what it looks like for this process of development for a low-income, working-class tenant that has always been oppressed and been told that they don't have the right to fight for themselves or to self-determine, to find the resources of empowerment to self-determine, and to also find ways of empowering other tenants. As an undocumented immigrant, where I got empowered myself through a process of politicization, but also like how to organize. I know that this can be done, and that is the skill that I bring to ATU, and like how to best do that with others, but also understanding the limitations and the skills that each of us has, and taking advantage of the skills. So anybody can become an organizer. The question is, what is the skill that you have, and how do you use that skill to organize others?
And I continue to strive to find for our communities the best in the young people that end up in our court system. So what we're talking about is young people who may have behaved in ways that have caused real harm. Some will say it's violence, gun involved, created injury, and bring fear. But it's exactly at that point where we're finding ourselves most upset with the young person, that we're really trying to recognize, you see, they have potential to be so much better than what might be their worst decision. That their decision doesn't have to define them, doesn't have to confine them, but in fact can actually be a path to another way of thinking, another way of being connected to your community, another way to show that you can actually be a leader in the community, an asset that can actually help the community succeed because you succeed, whether it's in school, in work, in being a great role model for your peers, for your siblings. Now, a probation officer is going to be challenged to say, you know, instead of you going to prison, I think with the help of the community, your family, the school, those that you might look up to, we could put together a plan that brings you a real opportunity towards maybe achieving some goal that I think could be encouraging, could kind of unleash your potential.
The Arab American Action Network, which provides they do a number of things, but they have two programs, the youth program and the Arab Women's Committee. The Arab Women's Committee has just put out a book, Towards the Sun, which has multiple short stories, and the title came from one woman who described her experience immigrating to the United States and feeling like an outsider for a long time and remaining in her house, and how that program brought a lot of light into what she considers a dark period of her life, which is why it's called Towards the Sun. They also talked about the youth program, and in talking about the youth program, they talked about systematically oppress the Arab American community in the United States. So they talked about SARs, which are suspicious activity reports, and fusion centers, which will collect information in databases that are inaccurate on profiles of Arab Americans. So they talked about how they educate youth in that way. They have a lot of interactive programs. And it also taught us a lot about organizing and how to be proactive. One of the women in the Arab Women's Committee went through a phone book, and she called up people to get people to come together, and they formed a group. That's how they started out. And she also went and knocked out on doors and got people to join, and now they have around 800 members, which is really cool.